Hello everyone, my name is Brian DeSono. I'm a PhD student at Syracuse University, and presenting alongside of me is Jordan Hayes, also from Syracuse University. And we did a study on a contextual inquiry of people with visual impairment in authentication. Alright, so current authentication mechanisms pose significant challenges for people with disabilities. There are very few empirical studies that highlight difficulties of visually impaired users in the context of authentication. For example, audio captchas have proven to be difficult for users with visual impairments. Because our team feels that this is quite an under-researched area, our study raises awareness of these difficulties and reveals limitations of current authentication mechanisms. We discuss implications for design and how we can build accessible authentication experiences for people with visual impairments. So from May to July 2014, we recruited 12 participants who self-described as having a visual impairment, including 8 blind users and 4 with low vision. We recruited participants in the Syracuse, New York metropolitan area via online discussion boards, mailing lists, flyers, YouTube videos, online advertisements, and newsletters affiliated with local disability organizations. We tried to reach out to as many networks as we could because we know that recruiting from disabled populations is a very, very challenging task. 8 males and 4 females with an estimated age range of 40 to 60 participated in our study, and their diverse professions include law, higher education, librarianship, sales. Some of them were former veterans and retirees. We also reached out to volunteer with local community organizations that serve disabled citizens so that we could get to know more about their community and build trust within our recruitment pool. We began our contextual inquiry sessions with a semi-structured interview by asking participants a series of questions to understand their computer and internet use, as well as their knowledge and perception of authentication systems. This approach consisted of 3 main components. First, we observe and talk with users in the settings where they perform their normal everyday tasks. Second, we establish a mutual understanding with the user to examine the topic at hand, and acknowledging them, the user, as the expert, clarifies that we didn't come there to solve their problems and answer technical questions, which saves us from misinterpreting their actions. Third, we guide the contextual inquiry on a clearly defined set of participants' concerns, allowing room for conversation to extend beyond the list of specific questions. We ask participants to log into their computer, their primary email account, their online banking or e-commerce site, social media network, and their mobile phones. And these tasks were chosen because they cover a diverse set of authentication scenarios. We analyzed data collected from each participant by reviewing from each session the transcribed interview, video observation components, and high-level summaries we wrote after conducting each contextual inquiry session. And we segmented the transcript according to various parts of the contextual inquiry and developed an open coding scheme to generalize key findings. We developed qualitative codes to summarize the most relevant findings we learned from each participant, which we clustered into sets of high-level themes, and we'll explain more about that later on in the presentation. To help pinpoint which aspects of the steps of authentication processes were time-consuming, we also conducted hierarchical task analyses to identify these steps, what our users took, and what actually went wrong in these processes. To triangulate different sources of data, we also included example quotes and comments from the observation notes and interview transcripts that were relevant to each step involved in the authentication process. The diagram above shows one of our participants as she attempted to log into her PayPal account. And we'll go more into this further. So I'm going to hand off to Jordan, who'll go more in depth about the findings of our study.
Thank you very much, Brian. The results of our study, after working with all of our participants and analyzing the data, we attempted to identify the major difficulties they faced when logging into various websites. In all, we identified 10 major difficulties, which you'll see in the next slide, that we generally attributed to 2 potential causes. One, a lack of knowledge and experience when using the web and assistive technologies such as screen readers that produce speech output to help users with visual impairments identify text and elements on a page, on their computer screens rather. They mostly used job access with speech, which you might know as JAWS, and that's the abbreviation, whereas users can employ keyboard shortcuts to help them navigate through complex web page layouts. This is another potential cause of most of the difficulties our participants faced. Here is the summary of the 10 difficulties resulting from our analysis. There's more in the next slide. We found 4 of these difficulties to be associated with general accessibility issues, 3 from the underlying authentication mechanisms themselves, and 3 more arising from both. We found the most common difficulties to include locating the authentication fields on the web page, encountering problems with JAWS, either waiting a significant amount of time for the thing to start or finish speaking, or failure to receive feedback about error messages, and then verifying the success of their authentication attempts. Besides issues with JAWS, most of the common difficulties attribute themselves back to D1, locating the login area on a web page. Now, because of time, and because these are only 10 difficulties, we will only go over the first 4. If you want to learn more, then please refer to the paper. As we analyzed the data, we eventually realized that our participants struggled heavily finding the authentication elements on a web page. We found this to be very time-consuming, confusing, and frustrating for most of our users. For example, some participants were unsure whether the actual sign-in element was a link or a button, and others weaved their way around complex web designs to simply find just where to enter in their credentials. This is a very serious issue for them because longer wait times result in them feeling more discouraged. In other words, generally all web content is protected by some form of credentials, and users who struggle to efficiently find the authentication area are isolated from the rest of the world because of their dependence on computers as a social lifeline. This video showcases one of our participants is completely blind and attempting to log into her online banking account. She tried to look for the login link twice. That was sidetracked when she encountered a second login link that took her to a completely different site than one she had expected.
Personal checking accounts. They must have changed the way it was set up since I last used it. Why didn't it ask me to sign in? It wants me to get into the rewards thing, you know. I gotta find out. I went to the top of the page again now with, I did Control Home, and I went to the top, and I'm gonna, there we go, link, sign in. I don't have a Google account. Huh. I haven't used this in a long time. Let's see. I don't understand. I should have a KeyBank account, not a Google account. I'm going to start over.
All right, this is just a more in-depth analysis of what actually was happening. You see, she was trying to go over to this sign-on link for the bank account, but what actually happened was she went to the sign-in for the Google account, which was very confusing and ultimately led to a failed attempt at logging into a website. A different participant struggled to determine if someone else had already logged into the computer, which usually happens in places, public places such as libraries. This participant thought that someone else had logged into his Gmail, but he wasn't quite sure. He took a considerable amount of time just trying to find the name of the user and after doing that, he had to find where to log in. Finally, this participant struggled to work his way around the Gmail site because he wasn't exactly sure what certain elements were called. By default, screen readers such as JAWS read contents of a web page in a linear fashion from the top, then gradually moving down to the bottom of the page. And then websites are generally designed with authentication forms placed closer to the center of the page, beneath a considerable amount of graphics and text. This practice posed a significant challenge to participants who depend on screen readers to access the information that they really need. Users with visual impairments are further impeded from efficiently accessing the authentication area because they must weave through a complex layout of web page elements to access the login form. We found many participants use an array of keyboard shortcuts to try to cut this down, but they don't always, that doesn't always work for them, and can sometimes lead to additional obstacles inhibiting their ability to authenticate. In an effort to verify the success of their authentication attempts, users typically use a variety of strategies to obtain the necessary piece of information, assuring them of a successful login. For example, they may search for personally identifying information such as their real name or any information that's unique to their own account, such as their username or email address, or even account management links, such as your account, that are normally associated with activities after users successfully log in. However, we find that these strategies fail to provide them with the necessary information that they need to verify their authentication attempts, and you'll see another example here on the next slide. It's another video. Now this is actually participant 1, a blind librarian attempting to verify the success of his authentication attempt. I want to let you know that he has successfully logged in, but he just needs to find a piece of information to tell him so.
Now, we need to see log in.
Search. Title is Gmail-inbox-Internet Explorer.
Set inbox.
Link images, link maps, link play. Account options, heading level, never counted, and
Yes, it logged me in. Great.
And this is a closer demonstration of the post-it account management links I was referring to earlier. You see up here we have multiple links that are presented to users without even them being logged in. You see there's the sign-in button up there. And users are presented with these multiple links before they even attempt to log in. This confuses them and can lead them to a false sense of being logged in when in reality the opposite is the case. I will now turn it back over to Brian with the discussion and what all of this can mean.
Great, thanks Jordan. So our findings illustrate the challenges participants face as a result of accessibility issues, hindering them from successfully authenticating into the websites and services that they use. In addition, we highlight the strategies our participants use to overcome their difficulties, and we situate these challenges in specific experiences our participants face in order to increase awareness of their holistic authentication experience. In our paper, we present 4 concrete suggestions as to how designers can improve their authentication experiences, not only for users with visual impairments, but for all users across a diverse array of populations. First, we suggest web designers, developers improve accessibility to the authentication areas for those who use screen readers. We recommend web developers to either place authentication fields as a first or one of the first elements read by a screen reader, or manipulating the website's front-end source code so that screen readers can more immediately say where the login form is located. Second, we suggest the introduction of web design standards regarding consistent terminology related to authentication mechanisms, which will reduce the amount of confusion users with visual impairments face when they're trying to locate authentication areas on the page. Third, we suggest screen reader developers add an additional keyboard shortcut for users to immediately identify any authentication fields on the page, which would take them to that authentication area. And fourth, the developers of web services should also provide confirmation messages specific to screen readers, indicating the success of their authentication attempts, which can be launched immediately after users submit the login form on a page. Taking into account this notion of universal design allows web developers to address issues that may help marginalized users overcome these difficulties, while also making significant changes that will benefit all users. Our study provides a nuanced account of various difficulties these users encounter with authentication. We've learned that there's no accessible standard for security and authentication, which should be part of the discussion when developing security guidelines for future authentication mechanisms. The most advantageous form of authentication is one that can be utilized by users of all needs, including users with visual impairments. Our recommendations aim to inform future-related research in authentication design. As the security community actively creates new authentication mechanisms, they should take into account the various characteristics of users and potential challenges they may face. New authentication mechanisms should be fast to use and work well with assistive technologies. In future work, we're extending this study for people with cognitive disabilities, and we are currently prototyping and building authentication mechanisms. We hope the authentication community can use our study insights to make their mechanisms more accessible. We also want to briefly thank our funding agency, our study participants, and a number of people who've helped us with the development of this project. Any questions?